Chapter 12 in the Wisdom of Solomon.
I better get my glasses on. It looks like a blur. Okay. For your immortal spirit is in all things. Therefore you correct little by little those who trespass, and you remind and warn them of the things through which they sin, so that they may be freed from wickedness and put their trust in you, O Lord. Those who lived long ago in your holy land, you hated for their detestable practices, their works of sorcery and unholy rites, their merciless slaughter of children, and their sacrificial feasting on human flesh and blood. These initiates from the midst of a heathen cult, these parents who murder helpless lives, you willed to destroy by the hands of our ancestors, so that the land most precious of all to you might receive a worthy colony of servants of God. But even these you spared, since they were but mortals, and sent wasps as forerunners of your army to destroy them little by little. Though you were not unable to give the ungodly into the hands of the righteous in battle, or to destroy them at one blow by dread wild animals, or your stern word. But judging them little by little, you gave them an opportunity to repent, though you were not unaware of their origin. You were not unaware that their origin was evil, and their wickedness inborn, and that their way of thinking would never change. For they were an accursed race from the beginning, and it was not through fear of anyone that you left them unpunished for their sins. Excuse me. For who will say, "What have you done?" or will resist your judgment? Who will accuse you for the destruction of nations that you made? Or who will come before you to plead as an advocate for the unrighteous? For neither is there any God besides you, whose care is for all people, to whom you should prove that you have not judged unjustly, nor can any king or monarch confront you about those whom you have punished. You are righteous, and you rule all things righteously, deeming it alien to your power to condemn anyone who does not deserve to be punished. For your strength is the source of righteousness, and your sovereignty over all causes you to spare all. For you show your strength when people doubt the completeness of your power, and you rebuke any insolence among those who know it. Although you are sovereign in strength, you judge with mildness, and with great forbearance you govern us, for you have power to act whenever you choose. Through such works you have taught your people that the righteous must be kind, and you have filled your children with good hope, because you give repentance for sins. For if you punished with such great care and indulgence the enemies of your servants and those deserving of death, granting them time and opportunity to give up their wickedness, with what strictness you have judged your children, to whose ancestors you gave oaths and covenants full of good promises. So, while chastening us, you scourge our enemies 10,000 times more, so that when we judge, we may meditate upon your goodness, and when we are judged, we may expect mercy. Therefore, those who lived unrighteously in a life of folly, you tormented through their own abominations. For they went far astray on the paths of error, accepting as gods those animals that even their enemies despised. They were deceived like foolish infants. Therefore, as though to children who cannot reason, you sent your judgment to mock them. But those who have not heeded the warning of mild rebukes will experience the deserved judgment of God. For when in their suffering they became incensed at those creatures that they had thought to be gods, being punished by means of them, they saw and recognized as the true God, the one whom they had before refused to know. Therefore, the utmost condemnation came upon them.
Okay. Now we're back to some good old-fashioned slaughter.
Yeah.
Although that chapter begins by saying, "For this reason thou dost correct them little by little."
Yeah, I noticed that.
That, unlike Sodom and Gomorrah, that boom, they got wiped out. In this case, God is trying to correct their behavior, and what behavior it was. They were murdering children, sacrificing children, cannibal feasts of human flesh and blood. They were initiates of the secret ritual in which parents slaughtered their defenseless children. Therefore, it was thy will to destroy them at the hand of our forefathers. Those are the Canaanites that he's making reference to. And I never really thought of the Canaanites as flesh eaters. They just weren't nice people. So now I believe they weren't very nice at all. But God, rather than just coming in and wiping them out, he's trying to correct them little by little. Well, that's kind of a hopeful thing for us, is that, God will not necessarily just, boom, destroy us. But little by little, he tries to correct us. And, this is a large group of people. And, God's people came in and took over the land of Canaan. And, they had a problem. Those who went into the Canaanite territory allowed the Canaanites still to practice their, but God was not happy because they're worshiping animals.
But it does still go back to mentioning the covenant he made with them when they came out of Egypt, or I don't know.
Yeah, it would be when the Israelites came out of Egypt that God made a covenant with them.
And so he doesn't want to go back on his word.
That's right.
Yes.
He's trying to not be. He's trying not to be.
To take it back.
Yeah. So in verse 22 it says, "So we are chastened by thee, but our enemies thou dost scourge 10,000 times more. So we may lay thy goodness to heart when we sit in judgment." So, he chastises some group of people, but, those would be the Jews. He's trying to, bring them around. But he said, some of them, they're going to get heedlessly folly. They were tormented by thee for their own admonitions. They strayed far down the path of error, taking for gods the most contemptible and hideous creatures, deluded like thoughtless children. I don't know what hideous creature these people were worshiping, although the Jews, when Moses was up on Mount Sinai, they made a golden calf.
It's not so hideous.
No, the Jews raised cattle.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think is maybe they were making goats or pigs.
Swine. Swine, idols of swine.
Yeah, but I can't imagine a group of people worshiping swine.
I don't know, we kind of do bacon, so.
Yeah, well, we worship bacon.
And barbecue.
Charlotte's Web.
Yeah, that's right.
Charlotte's Web.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyway.
It shows me about God's patience. I don't think I've ever, well, I know God has patience, but this really explains it.
Yeah, it points it out. He got his.
Yeah.
And, I look back over my life, I think, boy, the good Lord has been really patient. It's like that meme on Facebook that the guardian angel is going. You know, I think God looks over my life, he's going, oh, not again.
You did what?
Yeah. So let's move on to chapter 13.
For all people who were ignorant of God were foolish by nature, and they were unable from the good things that are seen to know the one who exists, nor did they recognize the artisan while paying heed to his works. But they supposed that either fire or wind or swift air, or the circle of the stars, or turbulent water, or the luminaries of heaven were the gods that rule the world. If through delight in the beauty of these things people assumed them to be gods, let them know how much better than these is their Lord, for the author of beauty created them. And if people were amazed at their power and working, let them perceive from them how much more powerful is the one who formed them. For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their Creator. Yet these people are little to be blamed, for perhaps they go astray while seeking God and desiring to find Him. For while they live among His works, they keep searching, and they trust in what they see because the things that are seen are beautiful. Yet again, not even they are to be excused, for if they had the power to know so much that they could investigate the world, how did they fail to find sooner the Lord of these things? But miserable with their hopes set on dead things are those who give the name gods to the works of human hands, gold and silver fashioned with skill, and likenesses of animals, or a useless stone, the work of an ancient hand. A skilled woodcutter may saw down a tree easy to handle, and skillfully strip off all its bark, and then, with pleasing workmanship, make a useful vessel that serves life's needs, and burn the cast-off pieces of his work to prepare his food and eat his fill. But a cast-off piece from among them, useful for nothing, a stick crooked and full of knots, he takes and carves with care in his leisure, and shapes it with skill gained in idleness. He forms it in the likeness of a human being, or makes it like some worthless animal, giving it a coat of red paint and coloring its surface red, and covering every blemish in it with paint. Then he makes a suitable niche for it, and sets it in the wall and fastens it there with iron. He takes thought for it so it may not fall, because he knows that it cannot help itself, for it is only an image and has need of help. When he prays about possessions and his marriage and children, he is not ashamed to address a lifeless thing. For health he appeals to a thing that is weak. For life he prays to a thing that is dead. For aid he entreats a thing that is utterly inexperienced. For a prosperous journey, a thing that cannot take a step. For money-making and work and success with his hands, he asks strength of a thing whose hands have no strength.
I really enjoyed that section.
That's an interesting section, isn't it? It's talking about beauty. And remember, this was not written in Hebrew. What was it written in?
Greek.
Oh, Greek. And who really first encountered the concept of beauty and the power of beauty? The Greeks. You know, the Greek philosophers found the ratio in building, that the height of the building had a ratio to the width of a building that was considered beautiful. That's why they all look kind of the same from the front, because that was the, I want to say the prime number, but it's not prime number, but it is the number of beauty. And if you look at all the statuary, you know, I've never been to Greece, But I've been to Rome where they've stolen all the Greek statues and brought them to Rome so you don't have to go to Greece to see them. But they have, this concept of beauty. What makes a face beautiful? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the Greeks really struggled with what makes something beautiful. And here, the author of the Wisdom of Solomon is talking about somebody taking a stick that's of no value and carves it and turns it into something beautiful, and then he builds a little alcove to put it in. Now, that's not really worshiping it, but it's pretty darn close in Solomon's mind, or the author of Solomon. When we look at things, in photography and in art in general, there's the rule of thirds.
Mm-hmm.
You have 2 lines that are horizontal, equal space, and 2 lines that are vertical. And for something to be considered more acceptable, you try to place the subject of a photograph or a painting at the intersection of those lines. Now, some people would say, well, it's off center. Well, if you're taking a picture of something that's square, they want to see. But if you've got a picture of someone walking along or doing something, you try to get them in that golden spot. And there's also this, I can't think of the name of it now, but it's like a seashell that goes around and around and around, and you try to place the subject somewhere within that, so the eye continues to move around the painting or the photograph. So, I mean, this is a time we really could use Jane, she could really explain all that. But it's people, just consciously don't necessarily think of that. I never thought of it when I started doing photography. And she said to me once, she said, have you ever taken a class? And I said, no, I just know what feels right.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, don't let them make you take a class. Because she said, I think inherently you have an idea of what's right. They're going to give you a class and they're going to start giving you all this stuff and you're going to try to manipulate it. And she said, if you're doing fine riding a bicycle, don't let them put training wheels on you. So, but there are these things of beauty, and they all trace back to the Greeks. Yes, Charles.
Is the word you're looking for perspective?
Perspective.
Is that the word you're looking for?
Yeah, that's. So, it really, it's when we look at art or beautiful things, we have to be careful. You can see God in them, but they are not God. And I think that's what the author Solomon is trying to say in this, that don't allow yourself to mistake the beauty of something as the beauty of God. It's just somebody with talent was able to do it.
I was intrigued by the fact that this Carver had no waste. He
Yes.
used the bark to make this, to build a fire for his food.
Yes.
There was sticks to play with it.
It's
He just
fascinating.
did everything.
Yes. And if you stop and think, that's kind of what God did. He used everything when he created the world. So that's why some of us aren't that good. Because we didn't get the best. So,
But there's still a place for us.
there's still a place for us. And that place may be at the prison, but but anyway, worshiping things, you worship God, and you can look at something and see God in them. And I'll tell you, we see this in the church. People start worshiping things in the church as if they're God. I was on the Urban Affairs Committee for the Diocese of Michigan, and we were closing a church in Detroit. Everybody had left the church. I mean, there were just a handful of people there. And when the word got out that we were going to sell the church, people who had made donations to the church said, we want those, like one of them was the altar rail. We had some people come into the committee and they said, we want that altar rail moved to our new church. Well, the pastor, the rector of the new church said, it won't fit in our church. It's not the same type of architect. We don't want it. And so we were saying, we had to say no. And I remember I sat next to the bishop at one of the meetings, and he leaned over to me and he said, Larry, you ought to just throw a match in there and burn the whole damn thing down. And I said, well, you better be careful saying that because we are in the city of Detroit.
Can you tell us the story of the altar and the table? It was donated and they rejected it, so they modified it?
Yeah, that was at the Virginia Seminary.
Yeah.
It looked like too much like an altar, and faculty wouldn't receive it. So they had to hire a carpenter to cut the front off and put 2 legs on it. Then it looked like a holy table, and the seminary accepted it. But, that's when Virginia was a low church seminary. Anyway, we've got to recognize that God's beauty is reflected in some things, in stained glass windows and that, but they're all theoretically to point us to God. And great cathedrals, they have those high ceilings and those long columns. And the idea is that when you go in, the eye moves up so that you're looking up towards God. They tried to build cathedrals and decorate them with art that would help people get a greater understanding of God. But unfortunately, for some people, like the people at church in Detroit, those things had nothing to do with God. They were family gifts that they wanted to see, that
they were worshiping in a way.
Yes. I mean, there are some people who stayed at a church that was getting ready to close only because they were worshiping the church.
Yeah.
So I feel sorry for people like that. But there's not much the church can do. And we never moved that altar. And we didn't move the altar rail. We did move the chalice and paten and all of those things there to a new church that was opening. But there are people who say, well, our family donated that stained glass window. We'd like to. Sorry, we can't take that out because the people who were buying the church bought it with that in there. It's like selling your home and then saying, well, we like the front door, so we're going to take it with us. Whatever's attached goes to the buyer. Well, let's go into chapter 14.
Again, one preparing to sail and about to voyage over raging waves calls upon a piece of wood more fragile than the ship that carries him. For it was desire for gain that planned that vessel, and wisdom was the artisan who built it. But it is your providence, O Father, that steers its course, because you have given it a path in the sea and a safe way through the waves, showing that you can save from every danger, so that even a person who lacks skill may put to sea. It is your will that works of your wisdom.
Let me stop you there. I'm sorry.
That was beautiful.
Isn't that, again, this is kind of that reiteration of what's God and what's an image of God. You know, the man who gets ready for a voyage and plans to set his course through the wild waves cries to the piece of wood more fragile than the ship which carries him. Desire for gains invented the ship, and the shipwright, with his wisdom, built it. But it is thy providence, O Father, that its pilot, for thou hast given it a pathway through the seas and a safe course among the waves. That, you know, we can appreciate that we're going to go on a ship, but let's not start worshiping the ship. Because once that ship is put to sea, God is directing its path. And, you know, it's not the navigator. The navigator has some idea, but remember, when the disciples were on the boat and, you know, the storm came up, Jesus was sleeping down below. They got all concerned and, you know, went down and woke him up and said, "Don't you care that we're going to drown?" Jesus said, "Oh, you have little faith."
Yep.
Calm the storm. Then he got out and walked ashore. I don't want to be on the boat with a bunch of these non-believers. So, I'm sorry.
It is your will that works of your wisdom should not be without effect. Therefore people trust their lives even to the smallest piece of wood, and passing through the billows on a raft they come safely to land. For even in the beginning, when arrogant giants were perishing, the hope of the world took refuge on a raft, and guided by your hand left to the world the seed of a new generation. For blessed is the wood by which righteousness comes. But the idol made with hands is accursed, and so is the one who made it. He for having made it, and the perishable thing because it was named a god. For equally hateful to God are the ungodly and their ungodliness. For what was done will be punished together with the one who did it. Therefore, there will be a visitation also upon the heathen idols, because though part of what God created, they became an abomination, snares for human souls, and a trap for the feet of the foolish. For the idea of making idols was the beginning of fornication, and the invention of them was the corruption of life, for they did not exist from the beginning, nor will they last forever. For through human vanity they entered the world, and therefore their speedy end has been planned. For a father, consumed with grief at an untimely bereavement, made an image of his child who had been suddenly taken from him. He now honored as a god what was once a dead human being, and handed on to his dependents secret rites and initiations. Then the ungodly custom, grown strong with time, was kept as a law, and at the command of monarchs carved images were worshipped. When people could not honor monarchs in their presence, since they lived at a distance, they imagined their appearance far away and made a visible image of the king whom they honored, so that by their zeal they might flatter the absent one as though present. Then the ambition of the artisan impelled even those who did not know the king to intensify their worship. For he, perhaps wishing to please his ruler, skillfully forced the likeness to take more beautiful form, and the multitude, attracted by the charm of his work, now regarded as an object of worship the one whom shortly before they had honored as a human being. And this became a hidden trap for humankind, because people in bondage to misfortune or to royal authority bestowed on objects of stone or wood the name that ought not to be shared. Then it was not enough of them to err about the knowledge of God, but though living in a great strife due to ignorance, they call such great evils peace. For whether they kill children in their initiations, or celebrate secret mysteries, or hold frenzied revels with strange customs, they no longer keep either their lives or their marriages pure, but they either treacherously kill one another or grieve one another by adultery, and all is a raging riot of blood and murder, theft and deceit, corruption, faithlessness, tumult, perjury, confusion over what is good, forgetfulness of favors, defiling of souls, sexual perversion, disorder in marriages, adultery and debauchery. For the worship of idols, not to be named, is the beginning and cause and end of every evil. For their worshippers either rave in exaltation, or prophesy lies, or live unrighteously, or readily commit perjury. For because they trust in lifeless idols, they swear wicked oaths and expect to suffer no harm. But just penalties will overtake them on 2 counts, because they thought wrongly about God in devoting themselves to idols, and because in deceit they swore unrighteously through contempt for holiness. For it is not the power of the things by which people swear, but the just penalty for those who sin, that always pursues the transgression of the unrighteous.
Okay. The Greek thought is permeating this chapter. On beauty and on behavior. The idolatry, worshiping the wrong thing. Plato, one of his works, I think it's the allegory of the cave, that he was in a cave, and the cave had an opening to the outside, but nobody in the cave had been outside, and people walking around on the outside, the sun would reflect their shadows on the wall of the cave, and people started identifying the shadows with the real thing. And Plato said one of the members in the cave was taken up to the outside, and at first he was blinded because of the light, but then eventually he saw that these were people, that the shadows were not people, they were the shadows of the people. And so he was sent back down to spread the good news to the people down below, and they said, up he went with his eyes, and he came down blind. They argued those shadows are the real thing. The real thing was outside. This is kind of, what we're getting at. I'm not trying to say Plato heavily influenced the author of the Wisdom of Solomon, but what he's saying is that people are seeing shadows and thinking they're gods. They build statues. In fact, in Rome today, along one of the streets that runs by the Forum to the Colosseum, there are statues of the Roman emperors who thought they were God. And, that you walk along and you can see each one. And, it's people would look on that and say, well, I'm seeing God. Until that person died, and the next statue was created. Oh no, that's not God. This is God. So what the author of the Wisdom of Solomon is saying, we're building these statues, we're building these shrines. Then the cult grows in fervor, as those to whom the king is unknown are spurred by ambitious craftsmen. In his desire, it may be to please the monarch, a craftsman skillfully distorts the likeness into an ideal form, and the common people, beguiled by the beauty of the workmanship, take for an object of worship him whom lately they honored as a man. So, he's saying, this is just a guy. He's not a god. But if you valued having your head attached to your body, you would say, well, the emperor is God. God didn't raise any dumb Greeks. So, or Romans for that matter. So, here we see this Greek philosophy kind of spilling over into the church. And, there's some real value to that. When we go, I know people who say, I need to go to the church to pray. You can pray at home. I do a lot of prayer when I was traveling, when I lived in Kingman and I did the church in Anthony, Medicine Lodge, and Pratt. It was a lot of time, windshield time. That was prayer. And
Pray to stay on the road and don't go off in the ditch.
that's prayer to stay awake. So it's important that we remember prayers aren't heard more in church. Now, of course, in the Episcopal Church they are, I'm sure.
And maybe the Lutheran.
Maybe the Lutheran Church, as long as it's an ELCA.
Yeah.
But there are people who feel you need to go to a holy spot. And what's a holy spot? I think a holy spot is where you are and where you talk to God.
But sometimes being in the church is more more inspiring. I don't know if that's the right word, but you just feel it more.
That's right. And that's what they're saying here, is that your spirit's uplifted, but we're not confused. We know that being in a church is not where you're going to meet God. Being in a church helps frame your mindset so you can feel closer to God. Charles?
Coming to church, no distractions.
Yes.
So,
Well, except before the service anymore, it used to be quiet when you went out. You could go in to sit down, and anymore, not Wednesday service, but the others were just all this chatter.
Yeah.
But I know fellowship's important too. But to me, that's after the service.
Well, I remember when I was confirmed, we were taught that when you go into the church, there are three things you need to pray for before the service begins. You pray that God opens your heart and your mind. You pray for the clergy, and you pray for the congregation. And, that's why it used to be when people came to church, they dropped that kneeler, got on their knees, and they prayed. And then they sat down. Now, people come to church, it tends to be, before the service, a little bit of a social hour. But we've really...
But just sitting there in solitude, you're sensing the presence of where you are, and you're getting your mind oriented and stuff.
Right.
To me, anyway, that's...
And it's like the prayer of confession. I think there really needs to be a long period of time between, let us make our confession to Almighty God, devoutly kneeling. We shouldn't go right into the confession. You need to stop and think, what am I confessing? But it becomes rote. We just sort of hop right on through. I've shared with you before that one of the priests I worked with when I was in seminary would occasionally pronounce the absolution, and then he'd say, smile, you've all been forgiven. Because we forget that the purpose behind the confession is to ask for forgiveness. And when we've been forgiven, we ought to be happy about that. So,
It seems like routine sometimes takes over, doesn't it?
yes. Yes, we know that's why people don't like change. Change in worship. Remember,
Yeah.
Naaman.
And Michigan?
yeah,
Man,
Nan Miskey. She hated the new prayer book,
It still had to be the, I don't know, 1919 or whatever,
28.
1928. Or
Yeah, when they changed to 1928, yeah, but see, that change and her comfort zone was disturbed. I will say, there's one thing about the Lutherans, they do kind of rotate. We have 3 different prayers of consecration. and two types of service, the old one and the new one. But Emmanuel, their work of worship, there are 10 different settings.
Oh,
And, the Gloria is different, and they're nice. We only use maybe 2 or 3 of them.
So like Saturday evening, did I not hear some Episcopal lingo intertwined in your service, or is that some Emmanuel stuff?
The bottom line is I am an Episcopal priest, but I usually read everything that I'm told to read. So, but I do ask for forgiveness during the confession.
You were saying something about being prepared and stuff for worship. I one time heard a preacher who said, when you take communion, don't come back to your seat looking like you just saw a dead person. Smile.
Yes.
There was something put in you that made you smile.
Well, it's, you just received the body and blood of our Lord and Savior. We should be happy about that. Dance on the way back. But we can't get people to sway in the pews when we sing. We sing a gospel song, and I'll tell you, both ELCA and the Episcopal Church are referred to as God's frozen people. Because no one wants to move. Oh my. I mean, it's like, how long did it take before we could pass the peace?
I don't know.
I mean, there were...
Yeah, from what I've heard, it took several months or a couple of years before doing it. Saying, peace be with you, and people just kind of split. So I'm with you.
There's several years. I mean, I remember people saying, I didn't come to church to glad hand people. I said, well...
You just glance around, a couple of people nod, and then
Yeah. I said, apparently you're not a realtor. Pass out business cards. So, but it's a bit of a struggle. I don't know if we can get into 15. You want to try?
Sure.
Let's do 15.
But you, our God, are kind and true, patient and ruling all things in mercy. For even if we sin, we are yours, knowing your power. But we will not sin because we know that you acknowledge us as yours. For to know you is complete righteousness, and to know your power is the root of immortality. For neither has the evil intent of human art misled us, nor the fruitless toil of painters, a figure stained with varied colors, whose appearance arouses yearning in fools, so that they desire the lifeless form of a dead image. Lovers of evil things and fit for such objects of hope are those who either make or desire or worship them. A potter kneads the soft earth and laboriously molds each vessel for our service, fashioning out of the same clay both the vessels that serve clean uses and those for contrary uses, making all alike. But which shall be the use of each of them, the worker in clay decides. With misspent toil, these workers form a futile god from the same clay. These mortals who were made of earth a short time before, and after a little while go to the earth, from which all mortals are taken, when the time comes to return the souls that were borrowed. But the workers are not concerned that mortals are destined to die, or that their life is brief, but they compete with workers in gold and silver and imitate workers in copper, and they count it a glorious thing to mold counterfeit gods. Their heart is ashes, their hope is cheaper than dirt, and their lives are of less worth than clay, because they fail to know the one who formed them, and inspired them with active souls and breathed a living spirit into them. But they considered our existence an idle game, and life a festival held for profit. For they say one must get money however one can, even by base means. For these persons, more than all others, know that they sin, when they make from earthy matter fragile vessels and carved images. But most foolish and more miserable than an infant are all the enemies who oppressed your people. For they thought that all their heathen idols were gods, though these have neither the use of their eyes to see with, nor nostrils with which to draw breath, nor ears with which to hear, nor fingers to feel with, and their feet are of no use for walking. For a human being made them, and one whose spirit is borrowed formed them. For none can form gods that are like themselves. People are mortal, and what they make with lawless hands is dead, for they are better than the objects they worship, since they have life, but the idols never had. Moreover, they worship even the most hateful animals, which are worse than all others when judged by their lack of intelligence. And even as animals, they are not so beautiful in appearance that one would desire them, but they have escaped both the praise of God and His blessing.
Okay. The bottom line here is he's saying, you know, these Gentiles are so easily fooled. They can worship several different things. They can have a different idol in a different room. And the commentary says, Gentile oppressors who adopt all heathen gods without discrimination. You know, we can just pick a god. And that works for now. And, you know, if somebody else has got a, you know, we go to Pigeon Forge, and one of the gift shops there has got a different kind of god. Well, we'll buy that one and put it out on the shelf in another room.
Not a critique of the artisan, but a critique of how we perceived
That's right.
what the artisan,
Yes.
the person created. I mean,
Yeah, it is not a critique of the artist, but a critique of the...
how people perceive
Yes.
that work of art.
So, verse 2, For even if we sin, we are thine. We acknowledge thy power. But we will not sin because we know that we are accounted thine. So the commentary says it can be paraphrased, if we sin, we will not give up our loyalty to our God, for we fear his power. So, you know, even if we sin, we trust God. And, you know, the bottom line is, there's nothing else. I mean, for the Greeks, with all their gods, and remember that Paul, when he was, I think it was in Athens, they had all these temples that they had built, you know, to all those gods in their pantheon. And they had one temple that was built, and it was dedicated to the unknown God.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, their hope was that if some God showed up and he didn't have a temple, he could say, we weren't sure of your name, but this one is for you. And Paul, who was shrewd, I mean, I know Paul, I think Paul gets a bad rap for some of the stuff he's blamed for, but Paul was really shrewd. He said, I know who that God is. Let me tell you about him.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Paul was able to go in and take people who were worshiping a pantheon of gods and say, this unknown God, that's the one you ought to be worshiping. And he converted them. You know, if you've gone in and said, this is dumb, you're worshiping all these gods, you're all going to go to hell. They would have shut him down.
Yeah.
But he said, hey, in your heart, you're looking for God. I'll tell you who this God is. And he converted people because of that. So we have to be careful, you know, picking on somebody else's God, because we all know the right God resides in this church and in Emmanuel.
Exactly.
All the rest, questionable.
On the fringe, yeah.
We'll see you all next Wednesday.
Thank you.
So your shot